the diagnosis, epidemiology, and management. So according to World Health Organization, globally, tuberculosis is the world's leading cause of death from a single infectious agent and among the top 10 causes of death. So the leading killer of people with HIV in 2024, and it is also a major cause of deaths related to antimicrobial resistance. Global efforts to combat TB have saved an estimated 83 million lives since the year 2000. You have to take note that tuberculosis is preventable and curable. So according to the Global TB Report of 2025, an estimated global total of 10.7 million people fell ill with TB in 2024. So why is this the case? So remember, we had the pandemic, okay, in 2020, the COVID pandemic. So the resources were divided, okay, and the resources were given to the COVID patients, and there's not a lot of patients who consulted for tuberculosis, and there was a lot of patients lost to follow up. So that's why there's again increasing numbers now of recognition and diagnosis of these cases. So in 2024, there was 1.08 million deaths among HIV-negative people and 150,000 among people with HIV. So that's a combined total of 1.23 million. So in the Philippines, we have the National Tuberculosis Control Program, and I believe we have a speaker also from DOH who will give their expertise, share their expertise with us. So our vision in the country is to be tuberculosis-free with 0 deaths, disease, and suffering due to tuberculosis. So for the year 2024, we have 544,000 droplets, which are aerosolized by coughing, sneezing, or speaking. Risk factors include contacts of TB patients, people living with HIV or PLHIV, elderly, more than 60 years old, diabetics, especially those who have poorly controlled blood sugars, smokers, those who have chronic lung disease, healthcare workers, urban and rural poor, indigent people, and those with other immune suppressive medical conditions. So these patients include those who have cancer, those who are on chronic steroids, okay? Those who undergo dialysis, these are patients at risk as well. Clinical manifestations, when you say tuberculosis, you have 2, okay? First is pulmonary, which is the lungs, and the other is extrapulmonary. So for pulmonary manifestations, I usually see these patients in the clinic. They present with prolonged cough. So usually that's more than 2 weeks, okay? Sometimes they tell, oh, doctor, I've been coughing for more than a month. Sometimes they have hemoptysis, okay? Blood tinged, okay? Blood tinged secretions. They have chest pains, okay? Weakness. They really feel tired. It's very difficult for them to work, okay? They have significant weight loss. When you ask this, we always ask them, did you notice that, your clothes are very loose, that you have to buy new clothes or you have to use a belt, okay? Because, significant yung weight loss. They also have fevers, night sweats, okay? Or they get chills, no? At night, they really feel very cold that they have to wear jackets, okay? So this is the other one, extrapulmonary tuberculosis. It's very common in the lymph nodes. We call it scrofula, diba? And then it may affect any part of the body, okay? So you can get TB of the middle ear, TB of the tonsils, okay? Pleural fluid, that's possible. TB of the brain, the bone, the intestine, anywhere, no? You can get TB. So there's different tables, no, for screening, but I'm just going to focus on screening and diagnosis of TB disease for adults. Okay, so that's more than or equal to 15 years of age. I'm not going to discuss the pediatric cases. I'm not going to discuss those for the healthcare workers and patients living with HIV. Just for adults only. Okay, if there are any signs and symptoms, okay, for more than or equal to 2 weeks, that's not resolving. Like you've given antibiotics already, the patient tried to rest, recover, take all the medicines, and it's still persistent. Okay, they have cough, unexplained fever, unexplained weight loss, and night sweats. Okay, if you have at least one of these symptoms, okay, you characterize them as presumptive TB. Okay, so you collect sputum sample, you ask them to submit their sputum. Okay, the phlegm, that's the phlegm. Okay, usually we do a test which is called Gene Expert. Okay, that's the name of the test. Gene Expert, you have to submit at least 1 ml of phlegm, okay, and they'll test it if it's positive or not. But if the patients don't have these symptoms, but they were exposed to someone with TB, okay, you do further workup. If no, then assess for other diseases. So these are just examples, no, of chest imaging. So for your age, usually what they do is they do clearance for fit to work or going to school, no. Sometimes you will see suspicious infiltrates. That's what they call, no, for tuberculosis. So those are the cases I get, and then we work up these patients for tuberculosis. So it's an accurate screening tool with 93.8% sensitivity, and it's recommended, no, to identify individuals warranting further bacteriologic workup. So these are the diagnostic tests. I'm not gonna explain na lang, no. This is the Gene Expert, the sputum test, DSSM, TB LAMP, IGRA, TBCS. So when you talk to your doctors, no, the doctors will explain these tests to you. So there are a lot of actually definition of terms for tuberculosis. The new cases, retreatment, relapse, and if it's active or not. But for the purpose of this lecture, I'm just gonna focus on 2 definitions, okay? Bacteriologically confirmed and clinically diagnosed. So the first one, if the sputum test is positive, okay? So that's bacteriologically confirmed tuberculosis. So what if, for example, it's negative, no? The TB is negative sputum test, but the chest X-ray shows TB, okay? Chest X-ray or CT scan, or by symptoms, it really looks like TB, no? For example, I treated the patient already for pneumonia, I tried to rule out everything, and I really feel that it's, tuberculosis, then the diagnosis is clinically diagnosed, okay? So this is very important, no, for classification. And for those naman, the loved ones, no, they always ask, Doktora, paano naman yung mga kasama sa bahay, no, if I have tuberculosis? So this is what we usually do. So household and close contacts of diagnosed TB cases shall be screened using symptoms and X-ray. So we do a chest X-ray. If we need to do sputum tests, we do so, no, and do follow-up of contacts. So every 6 months to 2 years, and it will depend also on the symptoms and outcomes of these contacts, okay? So sometimes you have to check also the helpers, no? The helpers at home, okay? Possible na they have tuberculosis, so you have to screen everyone, no? Including your parents, okay? And your siblings. So management, it's usually special antibiotics for TB infection. Most common, no, you'll always hear this, no? Rifampicin, isoniazid, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol. So you see, no, this is not the common antibiotics that you usually prescribe to patients, okay? So this should be prescribed by doctors. And to be effective, you have to take it every day, no, for 4 to 6 months, because you have to cure it, okay? Because if you don't cure it, if you interrupt the treatment or you stop it, it's very dangerous, because you can become resistant to the treatment of TB. So it doesn't respond to the standard drugs. If it's if it doesn't respond to the first line of TB drugs you give, it's called drug-resistant TB, and it requires treatment with different medicines. So as a pulmonary doctor, no, if it's drug-resistant tuberculosis and it's not working, no, the standard drugs that I give, I have to refer, no, to an infectious disease specialist and report the cases to DOH. Okay. And this is now the latest guidelines on TB. No, unfortunately, some of the medicines like rifampicin, it's actually hard to get here in the country. Sometimes it's not available, but as you can see, there's also other antibiotics here that we can give for pneumonia. That's why sometimes we don't give it right away to respiratory tract infection because we save it for our tuberculosis patients because we also, we don't want drug resistance to happen. So there are a lot of possible side effects, okay? But I'll just summarize the slides. Possible side effects include red-orange urine. They usually say it's royal through orange. They get rashes, okay? Nausea, vomiting, okay? Headaches. The uric acid can be elevated. They can get flu-like symptoms. So it's very important that we always coordinate with them, okay? And check for possible signs and symptoms because if they get adverse drug reactions, we have to adjust the medications accordingly. And how do you monitor treatment? You follow up after 2 weeks and then at least every month. You communicate with the patient, of course, the importance of adherence. That's why we do direct observe treatment. And check for the resolution of signs and symptoms, manage adverse reactions accordingly. How do you prevent TB? Okay, seek medical attention if you have symptoms. So you could see me in the clinic if you want, just message me. Okay, early treatment for TB can help stop the spread of disease and improve chances of recovery. Get screened if you are at increased risk. TB preventive treatment prevents infection. That's possible as well. And if prescribed, complete the full course. Practice respiratory hygiene. So there's what you call the cough etiquette. So when you cough, no, instead of spreading the respiratory droplets, you do like this when you cough. Okay, and then wear a mask if needed, especially if you're in crowded areas. Practice your hand hygiene, okay, hand sanitizer or soap. What you do for COVID, it's the same, no? You do it also for tuberculosis. And special measures like respirators and well-ventilated spaces are important to reduce infection. So usually when I'm in the hospital, I always wear a mask, no, to protect myself also. So it's very important. It should be integrated, patient-centered, and we should prevent these cases. Okay, and it's really possible. It can happen. And you're the younger generation, so I hope by the time you are adults, the numbers are very, very low, and TB will be zero na, Andro, in our country. Hopefully soon. The target is 2030. So let's see. Let's aim for that. So thank you very much. May I just ask if Arian Patrocinio is here? No? Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lakdao. Question, who here is pre-med? What is pre-med there? Okay. So in life sci. Okay, in questions can be reserved for later. Okay. All right. So okay. So in medicine, we have this saying, if it's not cancer, it's TB. Okay. So because of all the symptoms and prevalence and chronicity and all. Okay. With that, thank you, Dr. Tabor Lakdao. Now that we have understood a little bit more about the disease, let us now get into the know-how of our public health infrastructure, how our public health infrastructure responds. Our next panelist is a graduate of the BS Health Sciences program of the Ateneo de Manila University, and she currently serves as a disease surveillance manager at the Department of Health Epidemiology Bureau, overseeing end-to-end surveillance for TB and other priority diseases, including hand-foot-mouth disease, acute meningitis, encephalitis syndrome, and meningococcal disease. She is also part of the Bureau's modeling unit focused on developing TB models and previously led the team that developed the domain architecture of the Philippine Integrated Disease Surveillance and Response System under the U.S. government's growing expertise in e-health knowledge and skills, or the GEEKS program. She also previously worked in health communications, leading communication governance and corporate branding management for the DOH. So Ms. Misa is unable to join us on site today, but she is with us on Zoom to answer our questions later on. Everyone, please welcome Ms. Krisha Denise Misa.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Krisha Denise Misa. I'm a Senior Health Program Officer handling the TB surveillance at the Department of Health Philippines, and I'm here to discuss Stronger Foundation, Safer Futures, Reimagining TB Control in the Philippines. And we'll now be discussing the global and national context of TB and its situation, as well as the current and future efforts that we're doing to control and combat TB in general. But before we get into that, I would just like to share some facts on why we're commemorating the World TB Day every March 24th. And that is because of the discovery of the Mycobacterium tuberculosis by Dr. Robert Koch. And this bacterium is actually the one causing TB. And we all know that tuberculosis is a contagious disease and it's spread via different modes of transmission such as coughing, sneezing, speaking, and usually prolonged exposure among these modes, especially with an infected individual, could really cause the spread of TB. And mainly it affects the lungs, but sometimes it could also spread in other areas of the body as well, such as the bones, the spleen, and other parts, which increases the burden of getting TB. And annually, it is estimated that about 10.5 million cases are actually getting TB, with about 1.5 million dying from TB. And it's making TB as one of the world's deadliest infectious diseases. And since it's infectious diseases, generally we know that when we get exposed with an infected individual for TB, we also get already TB and we manifest its symptoms. No. TB is deadly because sometimes it can harbor in our lungs and other parts of the body, and it can stay there without manifesting the symptoms. And that's what we call the latent TB infection. And it's a bit dangerous, especially to those who have weak immune systems or those who are vulnerable populations that we have, especially like the people living with HIV, those with comorbidities, those who are impacted by malnutrition, and those who don't have access to food security, and sometimes those who are smoking, or those who are exposed to other risk factors that might accelerate the prognosis of TB and make it an active TB disease. So when you're an active TB disease, this is where you start manifesting the symptoms like the 2 weeks of coughing, getting night sweats, losing weight, etc. But we must all know that getting these kinds of signs and symptoms, getting TB, can be cured. So there's always a treatment for TB. So that's one thing that has to be inculcated in our mind, because TB is really preventable and it's also treatable. So let me share you some data on how TB is in the Philippines and globally, in the latest WHO Global TB report. So at the moment, this one is I'm not very proud to present these kinds of data, but we have to analyze this, that the Philippines is ranking third among the countries who are accounting for the 2/3 of the people who develop TB in 2024. So that's about 6.8% of the total TB cases that are estimated by the WHO. And looking into the data, we must know that not all of the TB cases that we are reporting are just drug susceptible. Some of them are drug resistant. And when we say drug resistant, it's about 7.1% in the Philippines who are not treated with the first line of defense of antibiotics for TB regimen. So sometimes they need, no, not sometimes, but they need the second line of defense for TB regimen, and that is more expensive in some ways. And that's why we really have to monitor them and to get them, really. And because of these number of incident cases, the Philippines really in 2024 had estimated of 37,400 deaths. So these are from TB, and it includes 1,400 deaths among people with HIV. And as I mentioned earlier, people living with HIV are one of the high-risk populations, no, to get TB in general. So with these estimates, there's still a gap, no, of the reporting gap, detection gap that we are reporting globally, and the Philippines ranked third among these. About 7.5% of our cases are actually undiagnosed and are not reported in the integrated TB information system. So that actually poses a problem because we can't really get into the people, and sometimes these people are living in geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas, and they're not getting the right treatment that they need. Because as I mentioned earlier, TB is treatable, it's curable. So right now, what we're doing is the TB inventory study, wherein we get to estimate the missing TB cases, and we are also estimating the incident TB cases, so that when we do modeling in the future, we know when and where to allocate these TB drugs, and when and where we are gonna focus, no, on certain detection improvements and the other interventions that we are promoting. So given these problems, how are we dealing with this? So as I mentioned, it's not just the government actually who is working on this, but it's a multi-sectoral collaboration. And we're very lucky enough that we were able to work with different partners to make the Philippine Strategic TB Elimination Plan, Phase 1, which was implemented from 2020 to 2023, and now we learned some lessons on how we really need to improve the TB interventions in the Philippines. And that's what we're implementing now in the 2025 to 2030 Philippine Strategic TB Elimination Plan Phase 2. And one of which is the expansion and funding of our chest x-rays, because generally in a population, when you capture more people who are presumptive TB and those who are manifesting symptoms, at least you'll get to filter people who really have TB. And to get into that accurate result, so we shouldn't just focus on the chest x-rays. We have screening, at least we narrow down the population that we want to get into and to treat. We also have to do some testing. And one of the lessons really is to expand the TB testing access and sites, and also to adapt the WHO recommended diagnostic tests, because these provide more accurate results for bacteriological confirmation of TB. And generally, aside from the testing, we also want to get into the detection and notification of TB in our information systems. And majority of our cases are actually reported under the older age groups. But we also want to improve our detection among the younger age, because they're the ones who are actively moving. They can spread TB in general. So that's why we wanted to improve the detection among the younger population as well. We also wanted to get into the notification of not just the drug-susceptible TB, but also the drug-resistant TB, because they're the ones who really need testing, who can be confirmed via culture of their specimen. So knowing about the drug-resistant TB and the individuals who are affected by it will help us resource better the drug regimen that they need to be able to cure them. And of course, these are not possible without the help of the private sector and even the other civil society organizations and other communities. And that's why we really need to work with them in terms of reporting TB cases, and also looking into active case finding among different individuals who might be showing symptoms and signs of TB. And generally, these would help us expand our TB treatment in general. And much more now, we are focusing on expanding the drug-resistant TB treatment expansion, because at the moment in our PhilHealth package, so we do have a PhilHealth package for the TB treatment, TB screening, and other interventions for TB. DRTB is not really part of the package that we are trying to expand at the moment. And we are working, there's ongoing work on that with the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation. And lastly, we do want to expand, as I mentioned earlier, TB is preventive. We wanted to expand the preventive measures that we have at the moment for TB. And that includes the TB preventive treatment, which is given to those eligible contacts of TB cases. So when they are given with this one, it's possible that they won't be infected with TB, or if the latent TB infection is already there, it might not grow to an active TB case, right? So this also includes the health promotion activities that we are doing, the TP Todo. So it's a campaign really to use TB preventive treatment, because it's really hard to communicate for a certain individual who is not manifesting symptom to take drugs, no, to prevent the growth of TB in their body. So sectoral campaigns like this actually help us, no, to communicate these kinds of importance, because as I mentioned, TB is preventable and it's really curable. So given this, the Phil Step 2 is actually have this vision, mission, and goal, no, we have in mind to reach the TB-free Philippines with 0 deaths as part of our vision. And given this, our mission is really to effectively undertake a multi-sectoral approach for an intensified, people-centered, inclusive, and quality TB care and support, with the goal to accelerate reduction of TB mortality rate from 18 to 5 per 100,000, TB incidence rate from 643 to 300 per 100,000, and TB catastrophic costs to 0% of TB-affected household. So TB catastrophic cost really is the amount or the budget that you have per household that is dedicated to treat TB. So the amount that you spend specifically to TB intervention. So we wanted that to decrease to 0. So given these goals and objectives, there are some of the strategic initiatives that we are doing, and one of this is emergency preparedness. So it should be cross-cutting, and we should be resilient to emergencies and disasters, and work with the DRMMC, no? DRMMC and other disaster risk reduction partners that we have to incorporate in their plan regarding these kinds of disasters related to TB, such as the pandemic or outbreaks, etc. So these should be included within their plans, and we are working, no, to include them. And additionally, we wanted to expand our health promotion. So as mentioned, we wanted to promote early health seeking, like for example, the screening, and of course, positive healthy behaviors like cutting down on smoking and other risk factors related to TB. And lastly, in general, we wanted to improve, no, and enable our health system to support TB elimination. So that doesn't just focus on the interventions I've mentioned, but also working on capacity building of our workforce, right? Putting more funding, engaging the local government units to actually implement the National TB Control Program in the Philippines, among others. And just to share a bit of the milestones that we have, so we are about to perform well in our TB incidence rate, because as I've mentioned, we wanted to close the gap in terms of reporting. So we are yet to see the decline really of the TB transmission in the country. But at the moment, we are focused really on the reporting mechanism part. That's why it's green in this area, and it's a bit higher, no, in terms of our targets for 2025. So right now, this is our TB incidence rate is 450.4, so 70% of our target. And the number of deaths, we are yet to finalize this number. So it's about 7,102, no, at the moment. And for our catastrophic cost, as I mentioned, it's targeted for 2030, so we don't have data for this yet. And next would be for the testing using the WHO recommended diagnostic test. So we're about 99% on that. And so we exceeded already the target. And we really want to increase the numbers among this. And part of that would be for the TB diagnosis and treatment as well. Because at the moment, there's 76% who are diagnosed, reported, and receiving TB treatment. No? So we wanted to improve on that aspect as well. And of course, for the coverage and social health benefits, we wanted to expand the TB DOTS package, as I mentioned, by 2030. And at the moment, we are really focusing on the RTB expansion. So that's what we're doing now. And lastly, as I mentioned, for the preventive measures on our side, we wanted to cover the people living with HIV, no, and provide them with PPT because they're the ones at high risk of developing latent TB infection or even being an active TB case. So that's what we wanted to prevent. And at the moment, there's still much work to do, but there's ongoing communication with the local health units to actually provide TB preventive treatment and to capture the contacts, right, who are eligible for TB preventive treatment and provide them with TPT. And of course, here with the household contacts, before we are not really reporting numbers on this one, but right now we fixed the system, the information system where the reporting system, and we were able to get this number, no, to actually know who are the eligible contacts for TB and to provide them with TB preventive treatment. So in general, no, these numbers are just numbers when we are seeing through them. But these are individuals, these are real families who are affected and impacted by TB. So given the multi-sectoral collaboration that we are doing right now and partnering, no, with the communities and enhancing the primary healthcare and the implementation of universal healthcare, hopefully in the end, no one will be left behind for TB because generally, it will not just take us, but every one of us to work towards controlling and eliminating TB in general. Maraming salamat.
Okay, thank you for that, Miss Misa. So we talked about pathophysiology, a little bit of bacteriology, and then a little bit also of pharmacology, treatment modalities, and then we moved into detection, approaches of the government, and multi-sectorial approaches of how to deal with TB. But then you wonder, no, why is TB still here? Why is TB still prevalent? Why is still a challenge for our country to treat TB? So our next two speakers will give us an insight to that. Okay? So our next panelist is an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Health Policy and Administration at the College of Public Health at the University of the Philippines, Manila. He is also the Deputy Center Director of the Southeast Asian Ministers for Education Organization Tropical Medicine Network, Regional Center for Public Health, Hospital Administration, and Environmental and Occupational Health. He was previously a research fellow at the WHO Collaborating Center for Health Cities and Urban Policy Research, actively participating in its research project and teaching activities. A health services and policy research specialist with international training on global health and implementation science research, our third panelist this afternoon completed his Doctor of Philosophy under the Disease Prevention Global Leader Program of the Department of Global Health Entrepreneurship, Tokyo Medical and Dental University as a Japanese government scholar. Friends and guests, please give a round of applause to Dr. T.J. Robinson T. Moncatar.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. And of course, thank you very much for the invitation. It's actually my very first time to deliver a session, lecture, or presentation at the Ateneo de Manila University. So maybe my bragging rights, in a way, I'm married to someone who actually graduated in this particular university. So she was actually the one who encouraged me. I was thinking like, it's far from UP Manila going to Ateneo. So she's actually the one who encouraged me. So why not also to teach or deliver a lecture at the Ateneo de Manila University. So yeah. So now, the question posted earlier was very interesting, right? Ang tagal ng problema ng tuberculosis. Tricia emphasized there's a program, there's a lot of budget or resources when it comes to tuberculosis, but why the problem is still actually there, So a lot of things that we can actually consider is if we would think about, every time we're actually faced with a problem, we don't look at it at face value or superficial. There would always be an underlying reason on why a certain problem is also there, And to actually emphasize that, the structural limitations or barriers or systemic issue actually affects, the incidence of tuberculosis. So we can actually emphasize that tuberculosis is a wicked problem. Ibig sabihin, there's a lot of barriers that we need to consider. To begin, actually, it was emphasized that it's a disease related to poverty. So income, occupation is actually a big factor that when every time we develop interventions or program, we need to actually consider that. So we can just imagine, can the government actually address this particular wicked problem of tuberculosis? Can they do it alone? So it's really a partnership. It was emphasized, again, it's multi-sectoral. It's not just the role of the public sector or the private sector to actually address tuberculosis. So there's a lot of involvement in several aspects of it. If you would want to address it at the health systems aspect, there's limitations with that. At the individual aspect, there's also a limitation. You can just imagine, di ba? Every time you look at tuberculosis, so the feeling of discrimination, maybe towards that particular individual or stigma, it's usually people are actually afraid, di ba, to divulge that they are actually suffering to tuberculosis. Or even if you have visited to a health center, di ba? Usually saan located yung TB Dots facility, di ba? Usually it's not in the very obvious area. Because of that particular stigma, you don't want it. The patients don't want that they will be known to actually suffering to that particular disease. So that's on the individual aspect. But of course, every time there's a problem when it comes to policy, regardless if it's a design or implementation, of course, ang unang taya would be the government. So, of course, the government needs to act on or do something. So, I would like to emphasize first, Tricia actually emphasized the TB elimination plan, the TB elimination plan or the program itself, it actually emanates. So we have a law or a Republic Act, we have a national policy for eliminating tuberculosis. So the PhilStep plan number 1 and the PhilStep plan number 2 is actually dito sila bumubunot, di ba? That's why they always tell why a policy is very important. Para magkaroon ng pangil or strength ang implementation ng isang program. So the step 1 and step 2 is actually anchored in this particular national policy. And the Department of Health created a lot of administrative orders to support eradication or elimination of tuberculosis. And one thing that we need to remember, the Philippines is actually devolved or decentralized. So, each of the local government units, the provinces, the cities, the municipalities have their own respective ordinances to adopt a national policy and to contextualize the implementation of this particular national law at their own local context. Kaya nga yung experiences natin per locality, it varies. Some LGUs are actually successful in addressing this, while others are not. Some have actually ordinances, and some don't even have ordinances. Another problem is, yes, there is a policy, but the big question is that particular policy implemented or not? So that's another layer of issue. Now, ang isang malaking tanong to actually add on, to answer the question right now, so in the systems thinking aspect, or if you would really deep dive to the problem, there is a lot of structural issues or barriers, or let's say challenges at the systemic or structural level on why we are not yet really successful in addressing tuberculosis. Of course, there's rounds of improvement, or we're able to really improve or address or lower down at least the incidence. But sabi nga kanina of our speakers, before you're just trying to address the normal TB, or let's say the basic TB, pero meron tayo na ngayon issues of multiple drug resistant tuberculosis. So that's actually something very difficult, or more challenging to address. But some of the barriers that we need to focus is, of course, the governance and the gaps in decentralization or devolution in our setting, or in our country, can actually not just pose as a benefit or a facilitating factor, it can also be a challenge. Next, definitely, the implementation of the policy would require financial resources. So, of course, if the budget is actually lacking at various levels, that would actually be a hindrance for us. Another one, very classic, it would also be related to other health programs that we have, the human resource constraints. To focus, it's the health human resource issues that we have right now. Also, as mentioned earlier, it's a partnership together with a private and public sector. But definitely, there would be issues when it comes to diagnosis and service delivery network. And this is something that we need to admit and a challenge. We actually have an administrative order with mandatory TV notification, wherein also at the same time, the private sector actually has a large role also to fill in. But as of the moment, there are mistrust. So the engagement, as much as we would want it to be strong, but there are issues or challenges between engaging the private sector when it comes to addressing tuberculosis. So let's emphasize each one of those. So first, as I mentioned earlier, when we focus with the gaps in decentralization, we always need to think about that in the Philippines, devolved nga tayo, so ibig sabihin, localities have their own power and freedom on what things they would want to do or prioritize in their own respective local government unit. So, the implementation of the tuberculosis program actually is the responsibility of the local government unit. So, for example, that would be the mayor. So, just in case the tuberculosis or sabihin natin health is not a priority in that particular local government unit, sabihin natin infrastructure yung focus nila. So definitely, that would be an issue. Likely, walang budget, walang tao, or walang support sa program for tuberculosis. So, what happened now in the Philippines is there is a significant variation when it comes to performance. Nakita niyo yung data kanina na pinakita ni Cristiano. If we would actually disaggregate that per locality, there would be variance na makikita natin with that. Next, political interference. Sino ang pinaka-frontline health worker natin when it comes to implementation of tuberculosis at the local level? Of course, there would be your physician, there would be your nurses, but of course, your frontline health worker. If you're familiar with the barangay health workers or community health worker, sila actually yung partner ng health office natin. But they're actually controlled by political leaders. They receive honorarium, so the amount would also vary. For example, so kapag napalitan yung mayor, for example, or even actually a barangay chairman, even, there would be actually a political a mass dismissal due to turnover. Another one is there would be a limited institutional policy. As I mentioned, yes, may national policy ka, but what if tuberculosis is not a priority? So again, the implementation of a policy would vary from context to context. That's actually a mechanism that affects policy development or policy implementation or focusing that TB is actually a problem. So if that is not a priority, there's an absence of ordinance, investments will actually be absent. So it would lead to inconsistent funding or the lack of logistical support to actually support and augment yung binibigay na suporta ng Department of Health. The Department of Health cannot actually do everything or all of the interventions in addressing tuberculosis. Next. Ayan, next. TB is actually would entail catastrophic costs to our patients. So, the costs, they will not just need to focus on diagnostic and treatment regimen. Although it's actually for free, lalo na if you're getting it in public facilities. But may iba pa silang kailangan. They would need transportation, nutritional supplements. And if you have certain disease, so likely affected na hindi ka makakapasok sa trabaho mo. So that would result to income loss. So that's a problem. Another one, the TB patients actually do not, or a small fraction of households to have TB case, only a few of them are actually receiving social protection program, or let's say conditional cash transfer. They are actually spending on non-medical expenses, so they need support with that. So let's say they are already experiencing poverty, and most of them are actually living below the poverty line, so almost 100%, 100 peso or less than 100 peso lamang yung pera nila. So that's actually a big challenge already to them. And at the same time, 2025, what happened? Funding shocks globally. The international support, or donor support was actually lifted. For example, USAID is not there already. There's a large fund actually provided for TB, HIV, and malaria. So that's lifted as of the moment. So given that would actually affect the implementation of the TB program in the Philippines, may affect community outreach or the active case finding and treatment, contact investigation and diagnostic, site operation. Next, let's focus with HR. This is, all of these problems actually with HR would also apply with the different programs that we are running as of the moment. It's always safe to say that particularly our public health workers are usually facing burnout. They're actually overloaded with running the 51 vertical programs of the Department of Health, and at the same time, facing clients and patients. So, given that several LGUs are not able to meet the staffing standard, meaning one doctor, let's say, to 20,000 population. So, not all LGUs are able to meet that, given budget constraints or presence or availability of plantilla. So that would actually have an effect in the implementation of the program. Next, as I mentioned, these barangay health workers are actually volunteers. So I also emphasized earlier that they are receiving a very low honoraria. So they are also using their own funds, let's say for transportation, or kapag sila ang nagkasakit, they are actually spending even for a large cost when it comes to their medical treatment or medical needs. So there is a workload imbalance, a heavy workload for our physicians, for our nurses, for our barangay health workers, and even for our midwives in far-flung area. So these particular individuals are managing a lot of programs, not just tuberculosis. They are doing their documentation, reporting, and at the same time, treating the patients in this locality. So the service delivery gap is actually a challenge. So there is an inefficient diagnostic placement. Na-mention kanina yung gene expert, So not all area in the Philippines actually have gene expert, So, given that it's not optimally placed, in different area, so ibig sabihin, the travel distance for, let's say, a health facility or a patient to actually access this is problematic or challenging. So it's a domino effect now in terms of addressing tuberculosis. Another one, although there's an existing TB information system as of the moment, of course, not all area have the luxury to have internet, to have computer, or most of our barangay health workers are actually 60 years old and above, or within 50 and above. And not all of them are actually literate when it comes to utilization of technology. So, yung paper-based documentation is still common, particularly in far-flung area. As much as we would want to have an efficient information system, that can be a bottleneck or a challenge. At the same time, there's a lack of integrated screening. Mentioned earlier that, for example, TB patients may have HIV, may have experiencing diabetes as of the moment. So there's still a room for improvement when it comes to integrated screening or detection. Next is geographical inaccessibility. At the end of the day, healthcare facilities or a quality healthcare facility is not accessible for all. Or there would be a healthcare facility pero kulang sa tao, kulang sa gamit, kulang sa gamot. So, usually people would just take it na no need for treatment, for example, or if they would go to the nearest healthcare facility with available facility, gagastos sila, no? And that would be really an effort for them. And lastly, the fragmented public-private engagement. So I have a student recently who did her health policy studies. Ano? So this was actually the research that we did. So we were able to identify that there is a sectoral divide. Of course, not all, ano, but this is a problem that was identified between private physician. Of course, several patients, ano, lalo na yung first-time consults natin, would directly go to private physicians. Ano? But there is challenge because in the system, in the TB information system, and there is actually an administrative order for this, the public sector must be notified. But not all private sector practitioners actually notifies or utilizes TB notification. So, of course, information or perspective about mistrust, for example, with the public, or the lack of information when it comes to the processes or even the policy when it comes to TB notification. The protocol in terms of diagnosis and treatment regimen must be updated. Katulad ng pinakita kanina, no? So it's already updated and it needs to be followed or avoided. And last, there's a challenging and cumbersome certification. So it was mentioned that several private physician thinks or feels that government certification or notification process is tedious and problematic. That's why private and public partnership, as much as you would want it to happen, it's actually challenging. Again, it's a multi-sectoral approach. If you would want to address tuberculosis, we need to work together. So sabi nga, it's curable, but partnership is very critical. So, it's not just providing medicines or diagnosis. If you would want to eradicate it, we need to actually know what are those determinants, what are those barriers at the systemic or structural level. It's not just a disease of stigma. It's a disease that needs social determinants of health, its triggering mechanism, and the macro environment factors to be identified and also address. Kaya at the end of the day, hindi lang siya trabaho ng Department of Health or ng ating provincial health office, city, municipal health office. Basically, tuberculosis is not just an issue na dapat i-address ng health sector. It's a partnership that involves several organizations and sectors. So, I think that's all. So, maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. I like those words. Wicked problem. Diba? Wicked problem, o systems thinking, ganun. Okay, so we talked about the science behind it, the way we're trying to detect and treat it, and we also talked about the different challenges, in terms of the systems, and approaching how to treat TB. But now let's pull it back down to the ground, for our last panelist, we'll talk. He will offer us a unique perspective from his experiences as a doctor in the barrios or to the barrios. Dr. Rap Abacan was a village doctor in southern Mindanao, where he delivered primary health care to patients in indigenous communities. Through his experience seeing inequality and injustice in the community he lived in, and through exposure to socialist political theory, he embraced the life of an activist and became a labor organizer while still seeing patients as part of the Medical Action Group, a human and health rights NGO. His political work consists of organizing workers in campaigns for a living wage, security of tenure, freedom of association, and just transition. He also served as a campaign manager for the 2025 midterm Philippine national elections Tuluk Espiritu, president of his organization and leading progressive figure in Philippine politics. Currently, he is the head of the National Pool of Organizers of the Bukluran ng Manggagawang Pilipino, or Solidarity of Filipino Workers. Ultimately, he believes the real struggle for humanity lies in the working class wresting power from the elite to usher in a society that directed towards the protection of life rather than profit. So again, for our last panelist, please welcome Dr. Rap Abacan.
Not on DTV stuff. All right. Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation that came before. I actually had, I took an MPH also at the College of Public Health. So it really took me back. I felt like I was back in class. So yeah, thank you very much for having me today. I'm very excited to have this important discussion on World Tuberculosis Day. And I found it so important also to discuss the social determinants of health as they are through all of those different building blocks, no? But I'd also like to take it back a bit, no? When we talk about the social determinants of health. And I'd like to harken back also to Spanish sociologist Vicente Navarro from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health in his article, which is what do we mean by the social determinants of health? No? Because we talk about the social determinants of health, we talk about all of these disparities that exist at all of these important levels, human resources, health leadership governance, availability of tech, financing, but we have to also talk about what causes these inequalities. And I'd focus on the word inequalities. What political structures lead to these inequalities that we experience in society? And why do they exist? Because for myself, going through the process of becoming a doctor and then later on becoming an activist, for myself, I found that it wasn't enough to talk about these inequalities that kill. Because truly, what we find when we go down to the root of the problem is that it is not so much just the inequalities that kill, but those people and organizations that benefit from those inequalities that kill. I see a few nodding heads over here. So I wonder if you guys have read the article. I highly, highly recommend it. So a quick raise of hands here. Who here believes that social services and healthcare should be directed to the poorest of the poor? Any hands? Any hands out here? Yeah? All right, sige. Okay. Who's poor? Can anyone define poor? Is it the poverty line? Is it how the NEDA defines it? Is it the minimum wage? What's the minimum wage in the Philippines right now? All over the Philippines? No, it's actually lower if you go down to Mindanao. In fact, actually, when I was in Mindanao, the minimum wage was half that of what the minimum wage is now. 316 pesos a day. Diba? So when we're talking about poverty and we're talking about workers receiving a minimum wage, if poverty is a risk factor for tuberculosis, everyone's poor. Everyone doesn't make the cost of living. The cost of living is about 1,200 to 1,400 pesos a day. Right? So imagine if you're making less than what you need to be doing, what you need to be earning every day in order to live a decent life, to afford healthcare, to afford good nutrition, to afford your rent. What kind of life are you going to live? What kind of unhealthy situation do you live? And there's an important question of why it is that our minimum wage and our structures are designed to keep people poor. Okay. So there's also that important question of who programmed that discussion of equity, of giving those who are poorest of the poor, right? Giving more to the poor. That is actually propaganda of neoliberal political institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, international multilateral development banks that spread the propaganda of concentrating and limiting our acts, our public works, only to a smaller and smaller section of society. That, my friends, is part of the neoliberal political agenda. No? In the article written by Vicente Navarro, he talks about neoliberalism and its effects in health. Is anyone familiar with the word neoliberalism? Have we discussed it previously? Okay, excellent. Okay, so when we talk about neoliberalism, we also talk about the important effects it had in health. Vicente Navarro lists a number, and I'll go through them here, and its effects in health. the need to reduce public responsibility of health of populations, the need to increase choice in markets, the need to transform national health services into insurance-based healthcare systems, the need to privatize medical care. Next, a discourse on which patients are referred to as clients and planning is replaced by markets. Individual personal responsibility for health improvements, an understanding of health promotion as behavior change, the need for individuals to increase their personal responsibility by adding social capital to their endowments. That is, you have to take care of your health as individuals, right? So this entire propaganda generated by the likes of Margaret Thatcher and Richard Nixon, popularized by the Chicago School of Economics, dominated the entire development discourse and governance structures of the world. And the effect on all of us in our consciousness, in the way we view public health, in the way we view health as a justice issue, is totally and radically changed. Whereas we used to talk about public health as an important social justice issue of equality, of social equality, that was something that was established in the Alma Ata Declaration of 1973. When we used to talk about health like that, now health is individualized. It's your personal responsibility if you're healthy or not. It's your personal responsibility what kind of education you get. It's your personal responsibility to get healthy, to stop smoking, to do this or that, to get yourself out of the poverty trap. But then we have to talk about why are these structures out here to keep us poor? In the Philippines, where we have so many billionaires already, you know, and we have billionaires that are able to extract super profits, how is it that we don't have enough resources as a country to fund more healthcare workers, right? When we talk about barangay health workers, we had to struggle even with the fact of recognizing them as workers. We treat them as volunteers. That's a political decision also. And I'll always remind everyone here, 100% of barangay health workers are women. They're women. And they're paid less than men because we expect women to be naturally caring. So our system enslaves workers, treats them as volunteers. It enslaves women and treats their work as less valuable than that of men. Right? We always have to remember these important health justice issues because I think we're talking about justice, right? We are talking about justice and we have to expose these unjust structures and directly offer our alternatives to adjust, to change the system, and yank its guts out, really discuss where injustice comes from. The question is, how do we move forward? No? Is it the work of what? The academe? Is it the work of doctors? Is it the work of nurses? And what type of political structures do we need to create these changes, these opportunities, right? Vicente Navarro talks about it in his paper, and he talks about how public health workers are unfortunately and tragically depoliticized. They don't form democratic spaces, democratic institutions to push back against these unjust structures, no? And who can blame them, right? Can you imagine pushing for change and exposing the mayor in your municipality in Mindanao? Can you imagine even pushing against the programs of a governor? How dangerous that is. I had a personal encounter with that myself when I joined the anti-mining movement in my municipality. I got kicked out through the half of the year of my last year as a doctor to the barrio. But I don't regret that at all because we were successful in the fight against the anti-mining, in the anti-mining struggle. So it's important to get political, and it's important to expose injustice where it is. And it's important to expose and understand and analyze who benefits from these political structures, who benefits when we defund healthcare, who benefits when we have this mentality of neoliberalism that offers us only austerity. And this austerity, it's very, very insidious because it takes on the language of justice, right? Equity sounds super good, but then you realize that you're only limiting it to a smaller and smaller population, a smaller and smaller definition, no? So we have to always recognize these structures and always seek to organize ourselves, no? I'll take some examples also from countries that do resist neoliberalism or countries that did resist neoliberalism. My favorite country when I'm talking about this is Cuba. No? I'm also part of a Cuba Solidarity organization. It's the Philippines-Cuba Cultural and Friendship Association. We launched recently an important solidarity forum with the Cuban ambassador to the Philippines and also a mobilization. We had a rally against the blockade and the impending attack of Trump on Cuba. I also personally support a Filipino scholar who studies in Cuba right now. And she tells me about how progressive the medical system is in Cuba. Anyone here knows, especially if you study public health or teach public health, the doctors, doctor-to-patient ratio. I was in a municipality of 100,000 and we were 2 doctors. The doctor-to-patient ratio in Cuba is 1 doctor is to 122 people. Right? Incredibly high doctor-to-patient ratio. And the doctors, their duties include going out and doing house-to-house surveillance. Doctors are the ones doing it, no? Doctors do it and they do everything from checking your water supply, checking your food, checking your housing, and they do mental health screenings too. Can you imagine what that does, what kind of primary care you get in a country that doesn't treat healthcare as limited to just the poorest of the poor, no? A country that rejects neoliberalism, a country that is socialist, a country that puts people first before profits, no? A large discussion also needs to be had about the type of power structures and decision-making in the health system, no? Rather than leaving the health system up to the whims of private practitioners that demand higher and higher salaries or greater and greater greater and greater income from more and more specified procedures. Doctors there treat their work as service for their nation, service for the working class, service for humanity. All right, I'll end my talk with that point. I truly believe that if we want to discuss health as a justice issue, we need to expose and we need to study the source of injustice and we need to address it politically to fight for democracy. Workers, health workers need to be political. They need to organize. They need to do more than just vote every 3 years, certainly. Because voting every 3 years for the same old type of people that run, no? The same old type of political dynasties that run, that won't get us anywhere. So I'd like to leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time. Power to everyone. Power to the people.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Abacan. So I would like to call our guests to join me in front of our open forum. No? I'm sure after hearing all these perspectives and talks that I think people in the audience would have questions. No, please, Doc TJ, Rap, and Doc Jill. Then I think Miss Misa is still online in the Zoom. No. So, if you have questions for our panel, please ask them now. There are microphones in the middle of the aisle. No, it's okay. Oh, I have to sit down. Anybody have questions?
Okay. Right. Good evening, everyone. So you can call me Francis. And I think I'd like to congratulate you guys on how you explained like the TB crisis, especially from the sociological lenses, right? And there's also some details on the public health. So I think one part that was not addressed yet when it comes to TB was like the technical aspect of it. So you mentioned DOH, right, and other government portions, like right, and the LGUs. I think the thing is, okay, the thing is, I have connections in DOST, and DOST has this project IPRDC, where they're trying to create like create treatments, like for example the PCR, DNA extraction, all that stuff to create like say let's say more accessible the TB treatments and TB diagnoses. So, however, I like this is just an example. However, I realize that this is a very technical innovation. So the question now here is, in the Philippines and in the developing world context, why do you think is making cheaper technical innovations on studying, diagnosing, and treating TB? So cheaper test sensors or materials to detect TB early, why is this not contributory or not sufficient to better the quality of life for those who have tuberculosis and, you know, to resolve the crisis po? So anyone can answer.
Sige, Rap.
Siguro I'd like to talk about the state of our biotech, no? And the field of science here.
Yes.
No? When we talk about employment for people that are in the field of science, my sister-in-law is a Chem MSE graduate from here. And she had to get her master's from abroad, and then she's gonna get work abroad because if you're a science graduate in the Philippines, if you're not a doctor or if you're not some professional that has a path laid out for you, working in science and tech in the Philippines is a dead end, not politically, economically for yourself, because there is no biotech. Us as a country, we do not have an industrial policy, no? Our economy is shooed into a global imperialist system where our product is service, no? We send out the best workers. We send out workers and train them in short courses to do all sort of things. Welding, butchery, being a domestic helper or a caregiver, no? That's what we do. Aside from that, raw materials. We have land for banana plantations. We have mining. We have what? Other products and other plantations, no? That's what our country produces. We don't have an industrial policy. An industrial policy was laughed at by our economic managers. And right now, our liberal economic managers are regretting that. They're looking at industrial policy now. So that's one of the big reasons why we don't have successful innovations. It's not for a lack of talent. There's so much talent here. Filipinos are smart. Filipinos are very capable to produce great wonders of science, but we don't have the economic infrastructure or the political support of our government to create such new innovations, no? Versus Cuba. Again, Cuba, a country as small as it is, was able to produce five COVID vaccines, and they put 3 into production. And they sent those vaccines out to be used by Vietnam, Cambodia, Vietnam, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Iran, right? A country that is under a blockade, 60 years of a blockade, that is experiencing chronic blackouts, but they produced vaccines for the world. And not just the COVID vaccine, they have a lung cancer vaccine, right? They have a new cure for Alzheimer's. Can you imagine that? But that's what happens when a country takes economic planning seriously, long-term planning seriously. We don't have that in the Philippines.
Okay. From the perspective of a doctor, is there like anything that you could you add for this, especially when in the utilization of the biotech mentioned, so the PCR, the DNA extraction, are they involved in the DB, like in solving the DB crisis, ba? Or like in the Philippines? Or is the solution more sociological in more people-based?
Sure, I'll try to answer that. Kahit di ako yung nag-talk. As Rap mentioned, there's not a shortage of talent and technology aspect, no. But when you talk about testing and detection, there are a lot of things that you need to look into. Sure, there are available resources for all these testing and screening, and we can always try to find cheaper ways of doing it. But at the same time, always remember that the reach is also far. So the inequality of access to these things, no? I mean, the simple thing about X-rays, diba? Or like Gene Expert. I mean, we see TB dot centers. Like TB dots, you know what TB dots is, right?
Yeah, yes, po.
Okay, so by TB dot centers, I've seen TB dot centers with the full equipment, up to Gene Expert, X-ray, whatever. But they also seen TB dot centers with the minimal equipment and staffing needed. We also need to, as a physician, we all know these technologies exist and their applications and uses, but it's really more of getting them on the ground. And going back to what Rap said, see more of that. The combination of all those things.
So what you're meaning is that even if you have like the most accurate technology to detect TB in the world, if it's not accessible, then it's not a good solution pa rin to the crisis. It's not an effective solution. Yeah, I think that's all for my question. Is it okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just to add, no, kasi nga, it was emphasized earlier that we already have an elimination plan, and step 2 na nga siya ngayon, or phase 2 na siya. In the elimination of TB, again, as I emphasized earlier, there's a long list of actors and stakeholders in a way that they're already segmented in terms of the potential responsibilities, or let's say resources or mandates that they can actually do in order to address tuberculosis. So like for example, in case if the focus is in terms of technology development, so the Department of Science and Technology is also on board when it comes to identification or support or development, let's say, of technology or regimen. But we always need to understand that, yes, every stakeholders are already identified. We're already able to also determine what are their potential contributions. But we also need to consider actually at the same time is to understand in terms of treatment is one, but again, if you would want to fully to address tuberculosis, it's a lot, again, of factors that we need to take into full consideration. So again, innovation, technology is one of the potential intervention. We can actually identify and map and include potential stakeholders, but there are also other facets that we need to also improve. So that's actually correct, that it's not just again, as I've emphasized earlier, hindi lang siya trabaho ng health sector. So even the technological aspect, there's a room for improvement. But again, we would relate that to the emphasis of Dr. Rafael. Is there a support when it comes to tech development in this particular country? Otherwise, like as you mentioned, you do your masters abroad, babalik ka pa ba? Or kung may opening dito, even like vaccine development here in the Philippines, for example. So again, we need to support this particular idea that we have. Of course, we would want to improve our diagnosis, the medications, we would want to do it here because it could be actually cheaper. But at the end of the day, that's actually a critical, again, a structural aspect that we also need to consider. Kasi development is one, but we need to sustain it at the same time. So ayun lang po to add on the stakeholder aspect. Thank you.
Right. I think that's all for my question na po.
Yes, and with all those facets, from the clinical standpoint naman, of course, they mentioned, the availability of the technology, the resources. But as a clinician naman, we don't just depend on the tests alone. If clinically we deem that it's, a possible case nga of tuberculosis, as I mentioned earlier. And aside from, the hospital, we collaborate, with health centers, the National TB Program. It was mentioned earlier that it's mandated, that we report all cases. We also have communities service, yung mga health centers where we work with barangay health workers, kasi you really have to be proactive, and patient education is very important because we have to have all these mga lectures, lay fora to tell everyone about this, and yung sa technology, that's very challenging, and yun na yun.
I think your question is so loaded. Miss Misa, to add in the chat, Adding to the conversation about innovations for the government side, there is a need to coordinate about the needs of the National TB Control Program in this aspect as they set the agendas prioritized in research. Additionally, there is a need to market or get the buy-in of the government to actually sustain the biotechnology you're talking about. Currently, the NTP is looking into implementing clinical diagnostic tools aided by AI, mobile X-rays, and among others. It's really a funding prioritization agenda, as mentioned earlier, as well, because we have to remember that we are still funding the basic services for NTP.
Thank you.
All right. One last question, I guess. Okay, or two more. Sige, go ahead.
First and foremost po, thank you po for the talk regarding the different factors that as to why TB is spreading or why it's hard to stop here in the country. But since he asked most of also some of the questions that I was going to ask, I would want to ask, just from a medical standpoint, as a person I got diagnosed with dengue before, and even though there's no clinical proven test to it, my doctors were like, uy, uminom kang tawa-tawa kasi nakaka-boost yun ng, ng platelets mo and stuff. And given that the fact that there's difficulty in accessibility to the different medicines and the ways that screening tests and all these ways of detection and prevention and cure for TB is in the country, meron bang ganong klaseng local technology or local medicine that can be made more accessible and available to far-flung areas, such as the case of tawa-tawa, but in this case, in the aspect of TB? And given that, is there any form of, because I'm also taking a science and technology innovation class, is there any form of funding or research and development into those kinds of folklore medicine that are not traditional in the sense na, uy, inumin mo to ganyan, but by tradition and practice, it has been helpful for these far-flung communities, given that there's that difficulty to access of medicines for TB.
For tuberculosis, there's none yet, no? There's none that I know of. But if you check the DOH website, no, there's endorsed alternative medicines for different illnesses, no, such as hyperuricemia, no, yung gout, hypertension, cough, no, yung mga lagundi, tsaang ulasimang bato, tsaang gubat. And they always ask that pag words natin. Yeah, and so there's alternative medicines that we can offer, no? But for tuberculosis, you have to remember, no, the etiology of tuberculosis, no? It's a mycobacterium agent, no? So it's very, very strong. It has bactericidal and static, no, components. So it's really hard to treat, no, tuberculosis. So I don't think there is a traditional, no, alternative medicine that we could use for TB. Kasi it's really a strong one, a strong bug.
So, to add to that lang, look into Mycobacterium tuberculosis, how it's different from other bacteria. Then you realize you need 3 to 4 medications to start treatment. And it's 6 months, the basic treatment. So that in itself is challenging, no? So maybe you're the one who's going to develop that. Yeah, diba? You never know.
Kailangan po muna makapasok ng med school.
Okay. Oh, not necessarily daw. Oh, sige. Thank you. I think we have 2 more questions. Sige.
Good evening po. I'm Aki Lacuna from 4BS Health Sciences. And for context lang po, we're currently working on a thesis with concerns TB in the carceral setting. So with the multifaceted of setting of this forum, what advice would you like to give to CIW, the Correctional Institution for Women, as they're about to transfer in Palawan in 2028? So parang we can further deepen our recommendation lang din po.
I actually did work at Medical Action Group, so a lot of our clients there are from our PDLs actually. So I have gone to CIW. It's one of the smaller places. And then because it's for women, pansin ko mas humane yung sa loob niya kasi may salon sa loob, kulay pink, yung pinapaint yung mga walls, kulay pink. pero there's barbed wire everywhere pa rin. Pero at least kulay pink. Sige. So, what advice? I actually have been also to the Bureau of Corrections facility, the penal colony in Iwahig in Palawan. And of all of the penal colonies na napuntahan ko, yan yung pinakamaganda actually kasi maliwalas siya, mahangin. Yeah, have you ever been? It's very nice. Oh, okay. So Palawan. Yeah, and actually
Okay lang kung just in case it's a good environment na nandun.
kung makulong ka. Yeah. Puntahan siya ng mga turista. Kasi you can actually tourists take a motor up there. So yeah. Yeah, one of the problems in carceral facilities is that it's cramped, it's tight, it's very, very depressing. Iwahig is a very nice one for as far as, carceral facilities are, at Medical Action Group, we still believe that the entire idea of putting someone in a jail without the ability to to leave and get reformed, that's already a human rights violation on its own. Pero for Iwahig at least, better air circulation. I'm not sure what else I can recommend to Iwahig, pero ayun, whoever's gonna get transferred there, okay naman. Pero it's also very hard for people that aren't from there because they can't get visits anymore from their family. That's what makes it even more difficult, more depressing.
Just to add in the research aspect so yung mga initial when I was just starting my research career so that was one of the researches that I was able to do, TB among prisons. So one thing that because it's a special population well, the disease itself is special, then the population that you are targeting, so pinaka-importante every time you do research is ethics. Now, there's just a newly released guidelines when it comes to how to do research among prisoners ethically. So there's a newly released global guideline. I suggest you to actually get a hold of that document and read it. Kasi it's going to be, you're going to do research ethics clearance for this, right?
We did po actually.
You did already?
Yes.
So, well, that's fantastic. Pero that's something that you need to look at. Kasi iba yung characteristics of that particular population Iba yung nuance, iba yung considerations mo, So, you need to check those documents. Even like, you're doing health social science aspect, I'm assuming this would be calling out of perceptions or exploration. So you need to be very careful with the questions that you are asking as well. So really try to read documents when it comes to how to ensure ethics is observed when doing this particular group of population. So that's something that I would suggest to you, how to actually what are the proper questions to actually ask to them? How to ensure that the information that they provide are actually protected. Things like that is going to be very important. But that's actually good kasi this particular population, usually we look at regular, in the usual population, but they also have their own specific needs. So thank you very much for actually doing research for this type of group. Ngayon, mas ginawa mo siyang interesting kasi them yung gagawin ililipat sa Iwahig so that's a different need or a different context yun kasi the Iwahig itself it's not a closed bar nakakagala sila dun well depending on kung sila yung security nila minimum to maximum, of course the maximum security talaga yan with bars, but if they're within minimum they are freely roaming there, even able to mingle with tourists, for example. So that's something going to be, you need to put that into consideration as well. But very good work, and looking forward for the success of the evidence generation. And of course, every time you do evidence generation, you would feed that to evidence or policy making. Yun yung challenge sa'yo ngayon. You just don't publish it or just present or you graduate, but you ensure that it's translated into meaningful policies or programs later on. All right? So yan lang. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you po.
Sorry, to add lang to the answer for question 2, Miss Misa has an answer. So at the moment, we have to yet to explore traditional medicines for TB, and there are approved regimens lang, but they are exploring TB vaccines currently. Okay, so last question. To take last question because my wife is policing me already. Sige.
Good evening po, panelists. Thank you for your lectures earlier. I am Algin de Guzman from 4BS Life Sciences. So in the first lecture, and also it's been mentioned in the Q&A before about the treatment or medicines that people from remote areas, alternative medicines that people from the remote areas could receive. This time, I would like to ask, what at-home treatment or remedies that people can do, especially in remote areas where they have limited access to drugs. So what do you suggest, like not alternative, but temporary solutions to the symptoms of TB?
Non-medical treatment regimens at home. Punta ka agad sa TB that's
Yeah, kasi if they really have symptoms, no, na it's more than 2 weeks, we really encourage them to go to the health center, no, or TB dots, to get treatment. Kasi the more you delay, no, it really affects the lungs. For example, no, pulmonary TB, it affects the lungs, it damages the lungs as well, and you could spread it, no, to other people. So I wouldn't advise, no, taking alternative medicines or, not endorsed by FDA, no. So better pa rin talaga you stick with a first line regimen of medications. Yes, stop smoking, live a healthy lifestyle, no. Yun pa rin. That's important.
To chime into that, no, I'm an emergency physician, so I get the critically ill patients, especially for TB, and that's the challenge, no. When they fall through the cracks and they don't get seen and treated right away, the complications are really bad, no. So as mentioned by Dr. Lakdao, it's best to have them seen right away sa TB dots, although it's challenging because the earlier you start detection and treatment, the less complications that there is. So ako personally, it's really hard to treat very complicated TB. So that's the best advice. All right, thank you. All right, thank you for our speakers for the open forum, no? Again, that's the time we have for today. Thank you once again for Dr. Tabor Lakdao, Ms. Misa, Dr. Moncatar, and Dr. Abacan. To show our appreciation, I would like to call on Ms. Riza Marie Rapada and Ms. Margarita Cristina Lakdao Umali of the Sustainable Development Goals Program at the AIS to present the tokens and certificates of appreciation to our guests. So picture daw po, picture. Baliktad. Okay, picture daw po. Kayo na. Thank you again to our speakers. No? Thank you po. To formally close our program today, please welcome Ms. Maria Margarita Cristina Lakdao Umali. Actually, siya rin yun ang budol sa akin, like Dr. Moncatar, para mangin dito. My boss and SDG head of AIS.
Hello, everyone. So, maraming salamat for being here. I'll try to make this quick. Thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion on tuberculosis. I honestly can't believe we actually did this because I felt myself half crazy when I said it out loud during our planning session. Parang gusto ko ng event about TB pero hindi lang TB. So ito na yon. Thankfully, my colleagues in AIS are also just as crazy. In AIS, we work towards promoting integral ecology and sustainability. And part of that mission is also communicating that sustainability is, yes, the environment, but it is also many other things. And this event today is part of communicating that many other things. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. After all, we brought 5 with us today. First, I'd like to thank everyone who helped make this event possible. Many thanks to AIS, especially our director, Dr. Eman Delocado. Thank you to our partners, the Office of the Assistant Vice President for Healthcare and Wellbeing, to Doc Shaw and Doc Izzy, Project Laan, and the Development Society of the Ateneo. Thank you as well to our forever partners in all our events in AIS, the CSMO and the CFMO. And of course, to our hero all the time, our DITS tech support, Mr. Rodel Crisostomo. Please, big hand for Sir Rodel. Thank you as well to our SDG interns who are always so full of energy. And lastly, a big thank you and shout out to my other half in the SDG program, Ms. Rizzi Rapada. Thank you to our panelists today for joining us. And I'd like to end my closing remarks with John Green's words taken from his book, Everything is Tuberculosis, which you can imagine inspired this event. The following passage is probably one of the most Ateneo things from the book. He writes, and I quote, "It is difficult to imagine eliminating tuberculosis entirely. The disease has many animal reservoirs, and because a quarter of all people living are infected with it, the total elimination of TB is a distant dream. But we could live in a world where no one dies of TB. That choice would require sacrifices, as most choices do. We would need to reform our systems to include the impoverished as well as the rich, offering what Catholic liberation theologians called a preferential option for the poor. We would need to improve not just healthcare systems, but also the social determinants of health, access to safe housing, and adequate nutrition and reliable public transportation, and so on. But this can be done, and in fact has been done, which is why TB death is already rare in so much of the rich world, although not as rare as it would be if everyone in rich countries could access good healthcare. And this is why I would submit that TB in the 21st century is not really caused by a bacteria that we know how to kill. TB in the 21st century is caused by those social determinants of health, which at their core are about human-built systems for extracting and allocating resources. The real cause of contemporary tuberculosis is, for a lack of a better term, us," end quote. And I believe we can do better for all our sakes. As we always say in sustainability, we should have started yesterday, but today is good enough. So we're all here today because John Green felt so strongly about TB and decided to write a book. And people like me, a humanities person with only curiosity as currency, picked it up and got hooked. And that's the power of effective science communication. And that being said, wala yung poster. Sorry, hindi pala nalagay yung poster. That being said, our next event will be a science communication workshop on April 8 from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Slots are surprisingly getting filled up fast. We're about at 60 now, but we'd love to have you there. Our venue is big anyway. Again, thank you for coming today, and good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. So before you leave, we'd like to ask you, the audience, to please answer this evaluation form, the QR code. You may visit it via the QR code, post it on the screen, as well as a link if you want to get the link after it. Ito yung SciComm na workshop. No? Anyway, this is a QR code. If you'd like a certificate of attendance, you may also indicate this in the evaluation form. For those who have left early, please send them this form as well. Once again, I am Dr. Andrew Mali, and on behalf of the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, the Office of the Assistant Vice President for Healthcare and Wellbeing, and Project Laan, as well as the Development Society of the Ateneo, thank you very much for joining us today.